Hello, my name is Laura Judge, and I'm the Farm Bill Biologist out of the Lenawee County Conservation District in Adrian, Michigan. I am making this recording for private landowners who may be interested in programs that may help them create or enhance wildlife habitat on their land. Some of the information presented today is relevant in other states, but this presentation is tailored to the state of Michigan, and the information is relevant statewide. Also, what is presented is accurate for 2022, but it may change in 2023 when a new Farm Bill legislation is passed. Um, and before I dive in, I want to thank all the partners on this slide who made this presentation possible. We have Farm Service Agency, Natural Resources Conservation Service, the Lenawee Conservation District, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and most importantly, thanks to the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, who, with the Wildlife Division and Hunter Dollars, make my position possible. These are the 5 programs that I will be covering today. Starting out with the Conservation Reserve Program. This is sometimes referred to as a grasslands program, and it is near and dear to my heart because grasslands are actually considered a critically endangered ecosystem, so restoring or enhancing them can have huge benefits. In a nutshell, this program takes farmland out of active crop production, and we do this by planting long-lived plants, also known as perennial plants. And these plants provide benefits like water infiltration, flood mitigation, and wildlife habitat for species like the ground nesting bird pictured on this slide. And the agency in charge of this program is the Farm Service Agency, which is a branch of the United States Department of Agriculture, USDA. And technical assistance for this is provided by the Natural Resources Conservation Service and conservation districts. There are several of what are called sign-up types within CRP and different practices within each of those sign-up types. And I don't have time to cover those all today, but I want to highlight CREP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which is temporarily available as of the making of this presentation. And I will touch on that a bit more in a minute. And then grasslands CRP, which is actually targeting existing grasslands, and that includes pastures and hayfields, and it does not require the land to be cropped to be eligible. However, the payment per acre is much lower than normal CRP as well. Again, there's a lot of details potentially here, so this is where getting in contact with your local USDA service center or a local farm biologist or NRCS staff can help you determine what might best fit your situation. But for the presentation today, I'm going to focus on general CRP and continuous CRP. So for both of these, a key element of eligibility is what's called cropping history, and that is requiring the land to be cropped or considered cropped. And crops we're talking about here, annual row crops like corn, soy, and wheat, cropped for 4 out of the 6 years between 2012 and 2017, and that year range will change with the next Farm Bill, which will probably be passed in 2023. The land also must have been owned by that person for 1 or more years. Contract length is 10 to 15 years, and the payment structure is where the Farm Service Agency pays half the cost for establishing the practice and the landowner pays the other half. So that's a cost share structure. And then there are annual payments, which you can think of as rental payments for the land and also as payments for maintaining the practice. And it's bolded here because this is what sets CRP apart from all of the other programs that we'll discuss today. It's the only one that provides annual payments. So as far as the selection process for general CRP, it's a nationwide ranking process, so that is competitive, and the application timeframe is variable, but often in January or February. And for continuous CRP, as the name would imply, that application time frame is ongoing, though ideally it happens in the spring. And that's not competitive as far as the selection goes, but the criteria for eligible land is more stringent. So focusing now on general CRP, this encompasses what we call our whole field practices. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to enroll the entire 40-acre field or whatever it is. It just means that these are larger blocks of land that are being enrolled. And these will typically be planted to either non-native grasses and legumes like clovers. These are your typical species that you plant in a pasture or a hay field. Or you can choose to plant native grasses and wildflowers. There are some practices in CRP that involve planting trees or shrubs as well, just so you're aware. As far as the payments, this is set at 85% of the soil rental rate, and that's the predominant 3 soils for that field. And then there's also bonuses like a 10% inflationary adjustment and a climate smart incentive. And you can think of these as just bonus dollars that will bump up your annual payment. And I can't really give hard figures because this varies so much based on soil types. But I can say that right now in Lenawee County, where I am, the average soil rental rate per acre per year is $153. And this could be very different in other counties as well. So again, getting in touch with FSA, they'll be able to calculate it for your field. And then there's continuous CRP, which is what we call our partial field practices, like strips and buffers. And this is targeting environmentally sensitive land, like land right next to a stream, river, or a lake, or areas of active erosion. Like this picture on the right, there was a gully here and a grassed waterway was installed to address that. And these payments are set at 90% of the soil rental rate, so a little higher. And then there's a couple additional bonus items like signing incentive payment and a practice installation payment. And like I said, I want to briefly touch on CREP, Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program. So under this program, which like I said is temporarily available as of the making of this presentation, soil rental rates will be higher under this program due to additional funding provided by the state. But there are also more criteria for eligible land. There's a big quality on water quality. There's a big focus on water quality for this CREP, so that would be strips and buffer practices mainly. But and again, FSA can give you the hard numbers on this. And there's a lot of practices under continuous CRP, but for this wildlife focused presentation, I want to dive a little bit further into what's called SAFE, which brings some whole field practices into continuous CRP. So SAFE is an acronym, and that means State Acres for Wildlife Enhancement, and it's available in the counties in gray on this map. And this is the Michigan Pheasant and Monarch Recovery Program. And yes, we are talking about native pollinators and monarchs because insects are considered wildlife actually, and they are essential in so many ways, especially to pollinate plants that wildlife rely on and then the crops that we rely on as well. And they also provide a critical food source for other wildlife. So an example of a practice under this, establishment of permanent native grasses. An example of a native grass is in the background of this slide. That's big blue stem, which is a plant that can grow taller than you and me. And it's one of those that gives the tall grass prairie its name. And to be eligible for this, you have to offer 10 or more acres or have it be part of a 10 or larger acre block of habitat. So in this example picture on the right, there's 8 acres of cropland being offered, and that is eligible because it is directly adjacent to 2 acres of woodlands, making it a 10-acre block of habitat. And you'd need to plant 4 or more species of native grasses and 10 or more species of native wildflowers, including 2 milkweed species, which does not have to include common milkweed. If you don't want it to, there are other milkweed species that are available. Continuous CRP also includes some wetland restoration practices, both continuous and safe, and CREP as well, so just be aware of that. And before moving on from CRP, I want to mention some species that benefit from it, starting with some popular game species. So we have white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, ring-necked pheasants, and cottontail rabbit. And for non-game species, a little sampling here, we got bobolink, monarchs, northern harriers, and eastern meadowlark. All of the birds on this slide actually nest on the ground in grasslands, and that includes the third picture from the left here, the northern harrier, which is a hawk species. And of course we have monarchs, and there's many, many other insect species that thrive in grasslands as well, and they are a critical food source for baby birds, actually, insects are. All right, so moving on to our next program, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, otherwise known as EQIP. And I like to think of this program as the a la carte options for conservation assistance, because there's these 4 different broad categories of assistance, and within those are a bunch of different practices. But for this presentation, we're going to focus on habitat for pollinators and private forest land. The Natural Resources Conservation Service runs the show on this program, and it is mostly a program for agricultural producers and agricultural land, but there is an exception to that I'll talk about. Eligibility for this involves verifying that there's no wetland or highly erodible land violations on the property, and that the adjusted gross income is less than $900,000 a year. The applicant and land also need to be involved in agriculture in some way for most practices. Contract length is 1 to 2 years, and payments are again on a cost share basis where the NRCS pays about 75% of the cost of the practice and the landowner pays the other 25%. And that's just a ballpark number. So with all of these programs, with CRP and with this program as well, it's important to be willing to be patient going into this, understanding that the process takes time. And that's because with all of these, you don't want to spend any money or do any work until your contract is official. For all these programs that we talk about today, basically they are based on a premise of a resource concern. And if you've already put in the practice, planted the wildflower species, whatever it is, then there's essentially no more resource concern, and therefore you're not eligible for federal funding anymore. So just be aware of that and be willing to be patient with the process. The selection process for EQIP is competitive, and it's based on the environmental benefits of the proposed practice. Application time frame is really any time the NRCS will periodically announce cutoff dates, and any unfunded applications from that round will automatically be entered into the next round. So an example of how this program can directly benefit wildlife like pollinators. For this, we do need the agricultural context for eligibility, but unlike CRP, the actual land enrolled does not need to be cropped. So uncropped areas of the farm are eligible. And this practice can provide nesting habitat, which is actually in the ground, and food for many native pollinating insects. It will also, by design of the wildflower mixes, provide continuous blooms throughout the growing season. So say you see a field in the fall and it's just awash with yellow, beautiful Canada goldenrod blooms, but that's the only time of year that you see any flowers out there at all. That field, unfortunately, is not providing a lot of benefits to pollinating insects because they need food, so pollen and nectar from flowers, throughout the whole growing season. So that's why these wildflower mixes are designed to provide food, flowers from the spring all the way up through the end of the fall for pollinating insects. And so EQIP for private forest land, on the other hand, so this is the exception. This does not need to be agricultural land, or the landowner does not need to be an agricultural producer. And then also setting it apart is that you are not required to harvest timber from this land when you're in this program. And that is different than another financial assistance opportunity that you may have heard about if you own private forest land, and that's the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development's Qualified Forest Program. And that program allows landowners to save money in taxes on that land, but it does require a timber harvest within the first 10 years of enrolling in the program. To be eligible for EQIP for private forest land, you'd need to enroll 5 or more acres. And the first thing you would do is apply for a forest management plan. And that would entail a licensed forester visiting your property and writing a plan for you based on what they see and based on your goals for your property. And the EQIP payment rate does cover most or sometimes all of this cost for the management plan. And then you would be eligible to apply for other practices in EQIP. Also, as an aside, coming back to that qualified forest program with MDARD, you do need a forest management plan to apply for that. So getting that through EQIP would then allow you to apply for that program as well. Be aware with the qualified forest program, you're going to need to be enrolling about 20 or more acres for that to be eligible. And so for those additional practices you'd be eligible for after having an EQIP forest management plan, there's many other practices including forest stand improvement, tree and shrub establishment, brush management, stream habitat improvement, and others. So I just want to walk through an example now of how EQIP for private forest land can be helpful. Maybe you've seen a scene like this, where there's this lovely forest, but you can't go into it. You're basically blocked by an impenetrable wall of shrubs. In this case, it's honeysuckle, but it could be buckthorn, autumn olive, burning bush, lots of invasive shrubs, especially here in southern Michigan. So what can you do about this? You can apply for a forest management plan through EQIP, and that involves establishing records with Farm Service Agency, verifying your eligibility, and then if you get funding, you would then have a forester visit your property and write the forest management plan, and then you would be eligible to apply for other practices such as brush management. And this would allow you to reclaim that understory. So you could either do the work yourself or you could hire a contractor. A contractor would likely come in with a forestry mower and then follow up targeted herbicide to kill this invasive brush. All right, moving on to our third program, wetland reserve easements. So just really briefly about what is an easement. It is essentially a voluntary legal agreement that limits certain types of land use. And it's something that stays with the land even if it's sold. It gets attached to the deed. And now you can think of this program specifically as essentially selling the development rights to that property and limiting other uses of it as well. So in a nutshell, this program, it has a really narrow scope. It is designed to restore wetlands. And this means that there was a wetland there once upon a time and that it was drained by ditching or tiling perhaps, or maybe it was filled, and this was to kind of dry it up for some human purposes. Agency in charge of this is the Natural Resources Conservation Service. The selection process here is not competitive. Most eligible projects are made an offer. Application timeframe is continual, and just be aware that from application to closing, it can take up to 2 years. And yes, we use the term closing because this is a formal process, a lot like buying a house. And in order to be eligible, you must have owned the land for 2 or more years, and the land itself must qualify. And a huge piece of this is the soil type. We'll be looking for hydric soils, indicating there once was a wetland there, and also needs to have potential for restoration. The entire sum can either be paid up front for the easement, or it can be paid at an annual basis for 30 years. So as far as those payments go, you can choose to have a 30-year easement, and in that case, 75% of the easement value would be paid. And this easement value is based on an appraisal. To give you a ballpark idea, for Lenawee County, the easement value at 75% is usually around $2,250 an acre for that 30-year easement. For a permanent easement, that goes up to $3,000 an acre, and that's again a one-time payment. The cost share for the restoration costs themselves under a 30-year easement is 75% of the restoration costs, and for permanent easements, 100% of the restoration costs are paid by NRCS. And so with all these programs that we've talked about so far, we mentioned practices that can be done. But this program, WRE, will always just be restoration of a wetland. It'll also have a buffer of land around it. And then there'll be, ensuing maintenance of that, including keeping invasive species out of it and keeping the grassland buffer free of woody plants. And our fourth program, the Partners for Wildlife program. So moving away from those USDA programs, now moving into something different. So really this program is a partnership first and foremost. And there are no payments involved with this program, but I think that it is really relevant to mention because there are also no agricultural requirements to be eligible for this program. So I think that's why it's especially worth talking about. And the agency in charge of this is actually the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The practice types involved are very broadly wetlands, grasslands, and streams in the northern Lower Peninsula mostly. And the selection process for this is really just alignment with agency priorities. This map shows the coverage areas for different Fish and Wildlife Service staff people who can help determine whether your project fits with their priorities. In Michigan, mostly the priority is wetlands, with that similar focus as wetland reserve easements, where we're targeting previously drained areas. Application timeframe is continual, and the eligibility, again, is agricultural and non-agricultural land. Contract length is 10 or more years. And the cost share here is variable, and it depends on the situation. So for a wetland, the Fish and Wildlife Service is usually going to pay about 95 or 90% of the restoration costs. For a grassland, the Fish and Wildlife Service usually provides the seed and does the planting, and then the landowner will provide in-kind labor typically. So this would be like preparation for planting by mowing, spraying, or disking. And then the landowner is responsible for the ensuing project maintenance, but you're still in partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service, and they're always available for guidance. Lastly, but certainly not least, I want to touch on the Hunting Access Program. And this program, in a nutshell, pays landowners to allow public access to private land for hunting. Agency in charge of this is the Michigan Department of Natural Resources, and there really is no selection process formally or application timeframe. The local conservation district staff and the DNR will determine eligibility, and then ideally the land is enrolled before the HAP lands open on September 1st. To be eligible, you need to be in one of the yellow counties on the map, and these counties are targeted for this program because almost all of the land in those counties is privately owned, so there's a lack of access to land for hunting. Parcels offered also need to be 40 or more acres in size. Contract length is usually 3 years. And additionally, the payment structure, it is paid as an annual lease payment to the landowner, and that's based on the acres, the habitat quality, hunting options, and then that'll get about up to $20 an acre, and there's a potential $5 per acre bonus as well if the land is also enrolled in a farm bill program. So that would be any of those first 3 programs that we talked about, CRP, EQIP, or WRE. Additional benefits of being in the program include liability protection, and it also can help limit crop damage. So if you're allowing hunting of wildlife species, especially species like the white-tailed deer, that might limit the damage on nearby crops. Additionally, the number of hunters allowed on the land at one time is capped, and that's based on the amount of land. And the landowner can also limit the hunt types, although this does affect the payment rate a little bit. And as a bonus, right now there's currently some money available for habitat improvement. So a really great time to look into this program if you think you might be interested. So in summary, there's lots of programs out there and there's lots of money, and hopefully there's something for you there. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at the number or email address here. I primarily serve Hillsdale, Lenawee, and Monroe counties, but feel free to contact me if you're outside that area as well. I've also included the link here to the USDA Service Center locator, where you can try to find your local staff people and get in touch with them. So thank you for watching this presentation, and I hope you have a great day.